You'll all have seen the headlines, workplace stress is on the rise, and as recent research is finally proving, individual sticking plaster solutions focused solely on toughening up employees will no longer cut it. We need to deal with the root causes, things like excessive workload, strained relationships, and toxic culture. Forgive me, but surely we knew this already, right? But rather than just moaning about how bad this all is, I want to explore how we got to this point, and perhaps more importantly answer the question, why don't senior leaders and execs seem to care? Right, so let's start with the case for the prosecution. You may work in a business where you feel your senior leaders genuinely don't care, or perhaps they're just knowingly ignorant to the problem. Maybe they don't see the issues as they're trapped in their own little bubble. Even more damning, maybe you think it's malicious. I was stressed out when I worked on the front line, so you should be too. Look, maybe this is the case in some extreme circumstances, but I'm just not buying it as the main cause of some of the shocking statistics that we're seeing in the world of workplace wellbeing right now. For starters, I've worked in this industry for nearly 15 years, and whilst don't get me wrong, I've come across plenty of senior leaders who don't quite get it when it comes to wellbeing. Very rarely, if ever, have I seen a leadership team sitting around a boardroom table discussing how they can make their employees' lives a misery. It just doesn't happen. So why does it come across this way? Well, I wanted to use a classic psychological study to attempt to explain some of this. You may well have heard of the case of Kitty Genovese. At 3 a.m. on the morning of the 13th of March 1964, Kitty Genovese walked home to her apartment in Queens, New York. On the way, she was approached by William Moseley, who'd been following her home. Moseley actually ran after Kitty, caught up with her and stabbed her multiple times. She screamed for help and a neighbour actually shouted at Moseley and he ran off. However, he came back later, chased after her again and stabbed her a bunch more times. In total, Kitty was stabbed over 12 times and the entire attack lasted 30 minutes from start to finish. At 4:15 a.m. in the morning, Kitty sadly died on her way to the hospital. In the following days, Kitty's murder didn't actually receive that much attention in the media. But the reason why we still remember it today is mainly due to a New York Times headline that appeared in the weeks that followed. It was all about the seeming inaction of the witnesses to the attack and read, 37 who saw murder didn't call the police. This created a storm of public outrage and led to the popularization of the term bystander apathy. The idea at the time was that the culture had got so bad in New York that people simply didn't care about each other. Even if someone was in grave danger, it was easier to say, that's not my problem, and bury your head in the sand. Now, the twist on the story is that as with most human behaviour, it's not quite that simple. For starters, in the 50 years that's followed since the case, it's come to light that the New York Times headline was actually incorrect and pretty misleading. Kitty did not die alone, but instead in the arms of a friend who'd gone to help her. Also, multiple calls had been made to the police, and 37 people certainly hadn't seen Kitty die. The vast majority had heard a few screams, looked out the window, seen nothing, and had just gone back to bed. So although the initial cause seems appealing, that people just didn't care, there was actually much more plausible explanations for what happened instead. Can you see the parallels and where I'm going here? So back to well-being and stress. If it's not a complete lack of care and apathy from senior leaders, what is causing the seeming inaction when it comes to treating the root causes of stress? One explanation is the phenomenon of diffused responsibility. We know through research that people are much less likely to take responsibility for action or inaction when other bystanders or witnesses are present. Organisations, particularly big ones, they've got lots of bystanders. Maybe senior leaders feel that because they've got a wellbeing manager or a HR department who are focused on this stuff, it's probably being looked after, right? Another common cause of the bystander effect is fear of judgment if you get it wrong. In the case of an apparent assault, you might end up looking foolish if you wade into what was actually just a lover's tiff. If we look at this in the context of workplace well-being, it's a really complex problem to solve. So if I'm a senior leader and I know I won't be able to instantly fix the problem, then perhaps I subconsciously avoid it instead. Or maybe I've been burned when I tried to help before. I introduced those no meeting Fridays and now everyone moans about them. The final possible cause is something called pluralistic ignorance, the belief that because no one else is helping, the situation actually isn't that bad. Most people I work with are just cracking on, so it can't be that bad, whilst failing to see the underlying levels of burnout as an example. So all of that brings us to the question, what the heck do we actually do about this? I wanted to suggest a few ideas. This isn't an exhaustive list, but just a few that were top of mind. Firstly, we know that empathy is the antidote to apathy. We have to find a way for leaders to truly understand the experiences of their employees. Data's a great start, but what about the stories as well? What about the experiences of the people being affected by workplace stress? Are senior leaders actually hearing this stuff? And are senior leaders themselves being open about their own thoughts and feelings in this area? Finding a way to enhance psychological safety in your culture is crucial so that people will share more freely and understand one another better. Next up, I want wellbeing leaders and external experts, including myself by the way, to do a better job. Let's take our share of the responsibility. For years, and let's be honest, we've been too reliant on these sticking plaster solutions and selling these to senior leaders as a solve-all for their stress-related problems. Why wouldn't a leader jump on this? You're offering them an overnight solution to an incredibly complex problem. They'd be crazy not to take that up. But instead, I'm suggesting we need to do better, to work with and within companies to approach well-being in a more strategic, long-term way, to collect more reliable data, to tell better stories, and to co-create solutions with employees themselves rather than just laying it on them. Lastly, and it's something many of us have been championing for years, you need to have someone who is specifically responsible for workplace well-being at a board level. Not just a champion or a sponsor who signs off the quote that you've written for them, but a chief well-being officer or someone of that ilk, someone who can't shirk the responsibility and claim it's someone else's job, and someone who genuinely has the authority to bring about change. Anyway, there's my 2 pence. Let me know what you think. Maybe I'm being too kind and most senior leaders within businesses are as evil as we think they are. Or maybe it's not quite that simple and there's something else going on. I'm sure I've not covered all the possibilities in this short video today. And most importantly, either way, what do you think we can do about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And remember, if you enjoyed this video and want to hear more content like this, be sure to join the Working Well community and follow me on my socials.